Want to make your own podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easy, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. Here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I have an outlet for the creativity and ideas I want to share with the world. I recommend you give it a try. We all have a voice, so share it with the world. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app, or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
She grew up with witchcraft and surrounded by witches, and she knew darkness before she knew light. So she had a sensitivity to it that a lot of Christians don't have. And now that she has come to the faith and is in right relationship with the Lord has allowed that path to be a tool, because that's a foundational experience, and it shapes her worldview, her biblical worldview, and it opens her paradigm on what's going on.
We've talked a good deal about, Genesis 6 and the sons of God and could an angel actually procreate. Think about this. You have the Messiah coming by supernatural means, okay? Only had a human mother. You have these people, abductees, satanic ritual abuse, talking about being impregnated. Like, forget all about Genesis 6 and the Watchers mating with human women. We've got evidence today. Welcome to the Days of Noah podcast, where we talk all things biblical, supernatural, and strange. Today, Luke, Don, and myself are going to go over just what it means to have an open mind to conspiratorial, supernatural, and a biblical worldview, and how that plays into our paradigm, what we're willing to entertain, what ideas we're willing to accept or at least consider before we accept them, and just how that paradigm plays into what we're willing to accept as reality in the world around us, and what that portends for the future when it comes to the end of the world, the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, and the mark of the beast. Well, welcome back, guys. Glad we could get together. And a little bit unscripted today, because I wanted to kind of recap and go over some of the things that we've talked about already, kind of just see what you guys think is important of what we talked about, what's upcoming on the agenda. I've got, kind of a list of show ideas for the future, and then just why it's all important. And so putting a little bit of a framework to that, kind of understanding the biblical worldview, the historical, the present, and the future. So is there anything off the top of your heads about, like, some of the things we talked about with giants, or understanding the Bible, or maybe conspiratorial things that have gone on? What stands out to you guys as being important to have as part of your worldview of understanding how the world works, how things in history happened, how to interpret the Bible correctly, when it comes to Genesis 6 and things like that?
I think on my end, I think that if any, strange, I guess I'm waiting for any, super strange worldwide event or news that is going to quote unquote debunk all of Christianity.
Oh,
And that's kind of in my own mind.
Really?
Or whatever.
So you're actually waiting for that. You're expecting it?
I'm
Or
expecting it, but let me. I guess I have to add to that a little bit. It would not be debunked in the believers, as far as the believers are concerned, but the people that are on the fence would bail at that point. Something like I know this is goofy, but something like a giant UFO that like the whole world sees, like in Independence Day. And then immediately it's like, well, we're not alone in the universe, and there must not be a God, and I can just see how the rhetoric would just pour out of the media. And
I think that's the first time I've heard you say that, and I actually have the same belief. And I believe you are correct that the ones that aren't solid in their faith, as far as Christians, the fence sitters, are going to fall off into the side as skeptics and even become unbelievers. Tim Aberino's got a viewpoint that in the future age, and we don't know if that's going to be in the next few decades or whatever, if the Lord tarries, he feels like there's going to be no longer atheists in the world because it's going to be so transparent that there is something, and you're going to either fall in line with the media narrative, the world narrative, or you're going to be of the Christian worldview and believe your Bible and believe these things are a demonic influence or origin. And so there won't be any, in his opinion, any more atheists. So I actually agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's good.
yeah. I don't know how much we've gotten into that particular, like when you're talking about like an alien disclosure and kind of, hey, we are your creators, not this Christian Bible. We're actually the creator. Kind of this false second coming. I don't know how much the three of us, I know Luke and I have talked about it, but Don, I don't know how much the three of us have talked about it at least yet. And so that's interesting that you're having that perspective too, because I share it as well with you guys. That seems to be kind of the counterfeit narrative that's going to come in the end of days. And Luke, you mentioned it, kind of that falling away. So in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. I believe referring to the Antichrist.
And couldn't we make the argument, and I believe we can, when Jesus says he's answering his disciples, what is a sign of your return? And we quoted a lot. And Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah. So could you tie in what, Don, you brought up, what we're discussing, say a UFO disclosure event, as being tied to the days of Noah? I believe you can. The origin of the two are the same.
Yes.
It's just it's almost like a modern version of what's going on. If you and Don, I'd love for you to expound a little bit more on why you believe this. But obviously, just in the last couple of years, even the Pentagon itself has released reports, and there's more and more discussion, and they've kind of renamed it. Instead of UFOs, something with a P.
Unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, there's more documented stuff that's coming from our government, and from the most part, the churches. I was just listening to Blurry Creature's most recent episode. L.A. Mazzulli came back on, and he was talking about this subject, and when Fox News was having interviews with the Navy pilot and the Pentagon report, he turned to his wife and was expecting, get ready, babe. We've been researching this for decades. Our phone's about to ring off the hook.
Yeah.
He said he got like one email. He said the pastors, the majority of people that knew that he was in it, he didn't get anybody reaching out to him. And that's That's kind of troubling. And in his opinion, when this stuff is released, seems like on Fox News primarily, he called it kind of a sounding board. It's almost they're testing to see if the conservative individuals in this nation, what are they going to do? Are they going to change their behavior? Is there going to be more of an uproar, a conversation? It's really been crickets, which is kind of sad. That means you got your head in the sand.
Yeah, a lot of the church and Christians especially are kind of asleep to these things. And it reminds me of the verse where it says, you have a form of godliness but deny its power. So we give a lot of lip service in church to the things that are foundational. Well, let me back up. We give more than lip service to the things that are foundational to our Christian beliefs. We understand there are miracles in the Bible and supernatural events, and we affirm those things. But then we kind of give lip service to, could they be happening now? Could these things happen in the future? Is there a basis for the supernatural worldview of Genesis 6? Not the sons of Seth view. And they kind of just give lip service to that stuff, and they don't really believe it. And I think too, just in my own, couple of churches I've been in the last 20 years, I think maybe 3 different pastors, maybe 4. They tend to, especially in the kind of your non-denominational, like evangelical kind of church, they tend to stay in their little safe zones. They don't like to venture out too much into the fringe. And they certainly, they might talk to you in private about some of those things, but they're certainly not going to preach on them. That's kind of the areas that they like to stick to Luke's point about, being asleep, and L.A. Marzulli saying he thought his phone would be ringing off the hook. But
and I have to give a shout out to one of my pastors. We're actually, as a family, members of 2 churches. So my long distance pastor, my online pastor, John Kilpatrick, Church of His Presence in Alabama, actually had L.A. Marzulli as a guest speaker to speak on this subject at one of his prophecy conferences. So, and he even talked about it in part on his own in the 2-part message he did, What If? And he didn't want his congregation, he didn't want to stand before God and say, why didn't you touch on this subject? He doesn't claim to have all the facts, but if you at least present the possibility, or what if it's this, or, it prepares an individual, a Christian, so you're not deceived.
Right.
Because your pastor is willing to go there, and that is very rare. I agree with you.
Yeah. I think that's the most important thing as we're talking about the issues that we've addressed in the past shows and kind of what's coming down the pike is having a proper understanding in your paradigm to be able to accept things that you thought maybe prior were conspiracy, or you wrote them off as conspiracy. And so that kind of speaks to just the importance of that worldview. And like the 3 of us, we would affirm, a biblical worldview is the only accurate and coherent way of understanding reality. That's our litmus test. We don't get to pick and choose what reality is correct. It's not a both and system. There are exclusive truth claims. Truth by its nature is exclusive. And so we start with that theology as the Bible as the basis of truth. And then we base all other truth claims against it. They're measured against it. And another key thing, too, is while there's multiple applications and sometimes multiple layers of meaning that one can derive from a given scripture, there's only one intended interpretation of the text that's put forth by the author. And so as we're kind of digging into some different verses on topics that we're getting into, we're kind of wrestling with those. And it's okay to suspend, I want to say belief, but suspend judgment if we don't know. I think part of what we are used to having happen is we show up at church and, okay, pastor's talking on Mark chapter 4. Okay, great. And maybe he takes a few verses, or maybe he does the whole chapter that Sunday. And it's very passive. We're expecting to hear, what is this about, and how does it apply to me? And there's not much left to the imagination. There isn't, let's read this, let's observe it, let's do the inductive method and ask a bunch of observation questions. Instead, he gives us the answer already. So our brains are kind of shut off. We're kind of used to just hearing, oh, okay, that's what I need to know. And then we move on to the next chapter next week.
And I would, you, Pete, and I, we grew up Lutheran. So we had the teaching from that foundational viewpoint and documented history of Martin Luther, because that's what he experienced. That's what the congregations of his day experienced. And it's kind of sad, but you're right. It's continued to present, where the person behind the pulpit has all the answers. They're going to decide how it's interpreted. You just listen, absorb it, accept it. Where, what did he do? He put the 95 Theses on the door of the church and said, I've read it. I don't agree with your viewpoint on it. And here's scriptural basis of why I believe what you're teaching is wrong. So, and then the Jesuits were formed, and his life was threatened. That's the foundation of where the Jesuits came from in the Catholic Church. Is they were the militant arm that was going after Martin Luther to kill him. And look at today, not to go down a rabbit hole, but when you question the narrative...
This show is a rabbit hole.
But when you question a narrative, whatever that narrative happens to be from a governing body in power, whether it's the church or the literal government, people take offense to that. How many teachers hate it when that kid is like, well, and asking
raising
the
his hand
questions is like, yeah. So, but if we can step back, have an honest, fair balance. I hate to use Fox's term, but
it's a good term.
A conversation without fighting, and you can hear both sides of an argument. That's the only way you can come to find out the truth. And I think you're doing what the scripture says. You're studying to show yourself approved, as a good workman. If you look at it from multiple angles and with prayer, in my opinion, that's the only way you're going to come to the true knowledge of what the scripture means and what truth really is. So, yeah,
no, I was going to say, and as I'm Googling it, the quote is, it's a mark of an intelligent mind or an educated person to be able to entertain an idea that you do not yet fully accept, to be able to kind of hold it suspended in your mind and kind of wrestle with it while not necessarily agreeing with it. And I was going to give a credit to Aristotle, but then the internet says, nope, Aristotle did not say this. Well, so I don't know where it came from then. I'll have to do more research, but it's still a really good quote because I think it's true. But we like to pick sides. I was just thinking about this this morning, getting ready for the day. You think about those that tend to immediately shut down anything that has a conspiratorial or an alternative worldview bent, and they kind of scoff at it, mock it. I think that for whatever reason, that type of person has aligned themselves with the powers that be, with those in authority, with those with degrees. That's kind of their safe zone. And then there's others of us that are very skeptical because that consolidation of thought and power is where the truth is often hidden, and the information we get from the media is controlled. So it's kind of a picking of sides, right? That it almost doesn't matter what evidence you present to a closed-minded person; they're going to write it off.
I don't know why that takes place. If that's just the easy way out, is just
it's a safer way out, because you can say, oh well, this guy has a doctorate. What does your guy have, right? So they have the appeal to authority fallacy. Don, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say the open-minded versus closed-minded argument is very good, I think, with politics. But when we're talking religion, I think it's very difficult, because if somebody sat down with me and I was trying to talk them out of being Buddhist, well, I need to lend an ear to their side of it as well. So that there could be a conversation, so that they don't think I'm just spouting at them, but I will not have an open mind to it. You know what I mean? I have discerned that the Bible is true, so I'm very closed-minded when it comes to religion.
That's what Paul said when he said, "I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some." So it's having an understanding heart and mind to where people are coming from. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily you're going to agree with them. It's almost like when he went into, what was it, like in Greece, and he said, hey, you have this statue to the unknown God. Let me tell you who that is. That's the creator. You've put a statue up there saying that there's one out there that you're not sure of. Let me tell you about him. Yeah.
Right. And one thing about like understanding where people are coming from, working in emergency services, as Luke and I do, you run into people every day that you're like, where are you coming from? I mean, their lives are just a complete, train wreck. But understanding where they come from can help us kind of process what we're dealing with or what we're doing. At least that's kind of the way that I've looked at it. I've never really understood, why the kids around Madison are, stealing cars and doing all this stuff. But when you start looking at their past, when you're doing investigations, it's like that kid was formed by what was going on around him. And now that doesn't take onus, or that doesn't take, owning it away by any means. And it doesn't take away the need for any type of retribution or punishment. But at the same time, it's just very, it's eye-opening to see. I mean, I'm very happy that go ahead.
You can see the cause and effect, I was just going to say.
Yeah, my wife loves true crime and the ID channel. And I remember some of the documentaries that would be on that channel, which was very interesting to me. If you were to look at certain acts of violence or criminal activity or serial killers, and when they would do, say, Bundy or something like that, and then you look at what was his upbringing like, what was his mindset, what was his influence that got him to the point where he made certain decisions. It doesn't excuse it away, but it does explain it to a degree. And I find that interesting.
It is. It's the same way that very evil people have figured out that you can cause split personalities, DID, dissociative identity disorder, through trauma. And then they use that to, create different personalities for their use, Manchurian Candidate types of things, MK Ultra. There's a cause and effect to our behaviors based on, nature, nurture, beliefs, all that stuff. So yes, I mean the biblical worldview is foundational for us, as we believe, for understanding the past, the present, and the future, and then historical. As Mike Heiser says, if you were to ask a Second Temple Jew, what's the basis for why the world is so corrupt, The modern Christian today might say, well, the fall, Adam and Eve, that's when sin and death came into the world. But the Second Temple Jew would have said three things: the fall in the Garden of Eden, the Watcher's sin in Genesis 6, and the Tower of Babel. Those are the three main things that they would have attributed to. And Heiser went so far as to say even that they would have put Genesis 6 and the events that led to Noah's flood, because of how corrupt the earth had become, with the Watcher's sin and the giants and the violence and everything that was going on, as a greater impact than Adam and Eve's sin. That's the way they would have thought of it. And I would kind of add...
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I would kind of add, too, maybe a fourth thing would be Satan's fall. And we've talked a bit about when that might have occurred. Possibly the Garden of Eden was the first time that he rebelled, or that was maybe the first recorded, but he had rebelled prior to that. So you might tie that to the fall, I guess, of those three things, but in a way you could think of it as a fourth reason. And again, we're still kind of trying to hash out, when the other angels rebelled. And then mankind's complicit role in that. So one of the things I'd like to dedicate a episode on is talking about how humanity was complicit in that transaction with the daughters of men and the sons of God. And the Bible records Lamech, who was a descendant of the line of Cain, as the first recorded polygamist, and likely was the family that participated in that. So it's not, and of course, the Bible's bent is on the story of humanity, whereas some of the apocryphal books like Enoch gives a lot more information about the sin of the angels and the giants and so on, right? But when Genesis is being written for the Bible, its focus is on humanity. But so when it says, the earth was corrupt and God repented that he made mankind, that's the focus, is about humanity. So it's not to take away from the responsibility of mankind that the Watchers did this sin, but here you had Lamech and his family participating in this willingly, and really just kind of having their way with the freedom God gave them to do whatever they wanted, and having no reverence for their Creator. And then from there we have giants leading to demons. I mean, I think I've said this to you guys before. Just think of how different a world this would be, how different history would be, if all there was Satan, some rebellious angels, however many, and then humanity's sinful fleshly nature, but no demons. I mean, it's incalculable to me, the influence of the demonic entity. And if the sin of the Watchers had never happened, then we could say hypothetically there would be no demons ever. There would only be humanity in their evilness, in our weak morality, and there would be Satan and some number of fallen angels. It's just, it's hard to even calculate how big an influence, in my mind, that is. And then humans...
I would almost say that both of those influences are the same.
Demons and angels?
If demons are the disembodied spirits of those that were an offspring during the Genesis 6 time and then destroyed in the flood, but we know that how corrupt the world was, because it's documented, and God himself saw what was going on, and they're like, I've got to clean this slate, and I only have one family, a small remnant that I can preserve to start over with. And that, in some opinion, the demons weren't present there. So look at the corruption that took place with no demons, essentially. And then you look afterwards, okay, the disembodied spirits are all those deaths of those hybrids of those, that situation, those spirits are roaming for a host. Just like we see in the gospel, they inhabited the one in the tombs, where there's a legion of them. They needed a host. They wanted a host. They wanted to fulfill their lusts through somebody. Now it's infecting the world in a different way, but probably to the same extent.
It's the same spirit, right?
Yeah, it's the same origin.
Yeah, you're right. Because they came
as
from.
The gospel says, it's going to get worse again, before his return, as it is the days of Noah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. And then also understanding the present, Luke, we've talked about the work of Doug Riggs, and there's others that have counseled satanic ritual abuse victims, Nephilim mothers. Then there's the alien abduction hybrid program. There's reportedly awful things going on in deep underground military bases. I think there was one that Doug was working with, or maybe I forget the name of this lady that was doing some seminars with Doug. But do you recall this, Luke? There was one victim that was saying that under Caesar's Palace or something in Las Vegas.
That was recorded. That was an account that Pastor Doug Riggs described to Nate and Luke on Blurry Creatures.
That's right.
Episode in October, I think it was, in 2021. So yes, it was, and all Pastor Doug was doing, like he said in that podcast, his goal isn't to gather information for research or to give us insight of what the darkness is doing. His ultimate goal was to help these survivors get free and to become mature as Christians. Now, if a part of them is disassociated and happens to share a story, I think the term is anecdotal.
Yeah,
and
anecdotal.
If he hears it, if he hears it from one person in one part of the country, and then he hears another, and they're just confirming what is going on, and they don't know anybody. L.A. Mazzulli comes across this when it comes to hybrids and stuff, or UFO abductees, that different people are testifying to the same thing that don't even know each other. Then you can lead some credence to it. But yeah, that's not his motivation. But yeah, that was where it came from. As he was just sharing what was, not saying it's fact. It was just what was presented to him. Yep,
exactly. Yeah, so we have that continuation of that initial entering our realm of the angelic, the demonic, and then kind of that working towards the end time of the satanic forces. Whether, as Tim Alberino says, they may or may not be aligned with one another. They're probably different factions that aren't all necessarily on the same page, but they're all probably united against God, against believers in rebellion. And so you have those things taking place. So understanding, again, the basis of it is Genesis 6, is Tower of Babel, is Babylon, and then all of these things that we see going on with, the Vatican, the CIA, deep underground military bases, these hybrid programs, crazy stuff that I had, no basis of understanding 10 years ago and would have written it off. But like you said, you start to begin to plot on a graph different things. And that's where it's important to have an open enough mind and go, okay, I hear this one person's testimony. And what does the Bible say? On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the truth be established. And so when we see these things over and over, they begin to have more credence. And then, of course, the most important thing is we can't change the past, but understanding it so we can interpret the signs of the times. You know, at some point there's going to be a falling away of the faith. And if we're taking a progressive Christian view of the Bible, that it's allegory, metaphor, you know, it waters it down. That's where, Luke, you said they're going to, people's kind of sitting on the fence or kind of wishy-washy in their faith. Yeah, when it hits the fan, they're not going to be sticking around. You know, they're going to take the easy way out. And it's understanding that, too, with the mark of the beast, that, look, it's going to be very appealing. It's going to be, you're on the side of humanity against some threat, or if you don't do this, you're not aligned with humanity and our common goal, or something like that, to where it's going to be so compelling.
Well, I mean, we obviously have the historical record of the vaccines with the COVID situation. Regardless of what side of the fence you are on, whether you should or should not take the vaccine, we do know that there was some very strong influence from governments and companies and all that type of stuff, all the way down to, shoot, I got to take this to keep my job. You know, I'm going to get kicked out of the military. I'm going to be, you know, I got to provide for my family. Well, I mean, what does the Bible say? Without the mark, you won't be able to buy, sell, trade. So the vaccine is not the mark, but look at the pressure that was put on the world with this vaccine, and now replace that with the mark.
Yeah, it's a precursor.
You're not able to travel. You're not able to. Yeah, it is a precursor,
and it's conditioning.
It's a conditioning thing.
Yeah. You're reading my mind. It's a conditioning, because now we have a worldwide collective memory. Billions of people having experienced this or heard about it, affected with it in some way or another, to where it unites us. And you know, not to get too off into the weeds, but Ronald Reagan's quote, he said, "I've often thought if there was some outside alien force, how it would unite humanity." So I think, again, just to kind of highlight some summary points: biblical worldview, having a supernatural and necessarily, I think, a conspiratorial worldview. If you don't have an openness towards that, then I think you're going to miss quite a bit of what's going on. And of course, you know, some may say, well, you know, there's a good reason why, you know, there's a Christian denomination called Lutheran or Catholicism. Like, then we can make sure errors and heresy don't get in, right? Because we've got this group that we trust, that have gone over this information, and that's true to an extent. But then what happens when error is codified in those groups? Now how are you going to get it out? Right? Now it's protecting what's outside of it, because you've already determined what should be in.
Yep. Very true.
So some of the topics that we're just suggesting for future, and we've touched on a number of them just in the last 30 minutes, is I'm just going to throw out some random concepts, nothing in any order particularly. But so again, I'm going through Doug Van Dorn's book on the Giants, Sons of the Gods. And that's been foundational to understand why certain tribes were committed to destruction. And that kind of leads into, Luke, the book you gave me, Laura Sanger, on the Nephilim traits, and how that ties into the Federal Reserve. And Don, do you recall if we mentioned this to you, but the Canaanite altar beneath Rockefeller's house on Jekyll Island? Does that ring a bell?
No, I haven't. No, it doesn't.
Okay, so that's one thing I'd like
to... Dr. Laura, did she document that?
Yeah, she did. She gave
her research?
She talked about it briefly. Maybe it's in more detail in her book, but when she was on Blurry Creature, she kind of just mentioned it really, really briefly. So there's this kind of this prayer warrior guy named Tim Bence, and well, I won't give the whole story because I want to dedicate a whole show to it, but he did a few interviews talking about his testimony. One with the late Rob Skiba, and how he was doing spiritual war against these ancient Canaanite altars where there was, human sacrifice, things like that going on. And come to find out that has ties to the creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913 and that secret meeting at Jekyll Island.
Okay, so the land where the meeting took place, which is the island of Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, before that meeting in 1913, there was sin that took place by these actions that probably was unrepented of.
Right.
It hadn't been cleansed. So there's demonic influence, there's demonic spirits that are tied to that are probably roaming the second heavens over that land.
Yep.
Second heaven and first heaven, probably, in our realm. That's just kind of how I see it. Mm-hmm. And then because you go down to New Orleans and the sins that are, there's a different atmosphere when you go to certain Vegas. I've never been there, but I'm sure there's a feeling you could get by being in certain areas that are almost demonically charged. Mm-hmm. And then if you have this motive that, I'm sure these gentlemen that met at Jekyll Island to form the Federal Reserve, they might not have known the ancient history. They might not. But I don't think it's a coincidence that they were led to that place.
Right. And for him to build his house right on top of it. Laura Sanger calls it spiritual mapping, and that's one of the things that she does is to through a series of criteria to kind of figure out a geographical area's spiritual mapping in the sense of 4 key areas of sin. And I believe there's sexual, there's like blood, murder, that kind of stuff, and I forget the other 2. But major things that have an impact on the future if not dealt with. So that I think that would be really cool to go through Tim's testimony on that. And then we've talked some on the power of words. Deuteronomy 32, you have the mistranslation of the sons of Israel, but it's correctly the sons of God. So that's kind of where God is dividing up the nations over with gods over them. And is that the same place? No, that's Psalm. I think it's Psalm 82 where it says, "You are gods, but you shall die like men." And so it's clearly, obviously, talking about angelic beings, because why else would he say, "You shall die like men"? So some of those mistranslations where understanding it in the context of Genesis 6, it all ties in to make sense. Well, even Jesus saying, or in the Gospels, when he was descended into hell, he spoke to the spirits in chains, right? Isn't there verses about that?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. So where do we get?
It is believed that what is documented in Jude about those that are in those chains are the ones that committed the original Genesis 6 sin, and that Christ, after he fulfilled his mandate as fully God and fully man, came there to put the stamp on it and let them know, I have conquered what and it was a victory lap is what he did.
It's a victory lap. And it was also saying, hey, you see me here, you think that means that I lost. And I'm saying I didn't lose, because you wouldn't expect to see me here with you unless I lost. But I'm telling you, nope, I won. So it's amazing how many. That's just an example or two of how many things tie into the Genesis 6 event, or even Paul saying, women should wear head coverings because of the angels. Like there's so many verses that we go, I don't know what that means. But like Luke, like what you just said, Jude and then Peter using language about in chains, and that comes right from Enoch. So all these things being tied together. Okay, some other things. Understanding the fall in God's plan. So there's a book by Leslie Weatherhead called The Three Wills of God. It was written like 100 years ago or something. And that's been really foundational to me to understand how God can desire different things or have different wills that work at the same time. So the way he puts it is God has an ultimate will, a perfect will, and a circumstantial will. And how do those three work in tandem with one another? So the perfect will would be, hey, I don't want you to sin. I've got a better plan for your life in mind. This is what I want. So picture like in heaven, all things being made new, everything being made right. Okay, that's perfect will. Then there's the ultimate will. Well, I've got free will for you, humanity. I've got these rules in place, so I'm going to tolerate to an extent evil and sin and different things. Even though it's not what I really want, it is what I want, because for this season, I'm allowing it, I'm using it, these are the rules I put in place. So basically we can say anything that actually comes to pass is God's ultimate will, because it ultimately did happen. And then the circumstantial is, like think of Anne Frank in Nazi Germany. Okay, obviously the will for her life is very different than Reggie White of the Green Bay Packers. Having the fame and the money and being a Christian, in the limelight. Very different will for his life than a captive in Nazi Germany. So that's really been helpful to me to understand how, the age-old question, why does evil exist in the world? Why is suffering? And then another thing is the derivation of occult powers, what they are, how they're derived, how do they connect to Genesis 6, Tower of Babel. There's an ex-Satanist named John Ramirez. He's got a bunch of books, but the one that I listened to on Audible was, I think it's called Out of the Devil's Cauldron, where he talks about kind of growing up in these different occult, satanic. His whole household was in it, and so he has kind of a first-hand view of that thing that again, largely Christians give lip service to, but he saw it. Luke, just like you said about Natalie with her experiences, it makes it a lot more real. Or as Nate and Luke say, when you see a Bigfoot or you have a abduction, like, it makes this stuff real.
Yeah, I'll say it again. Yeah, my wife, she grew up in with witchcraft and surrounded by witches, and and she knew darkness before she knew light. And so she had a sensitivity to it that a lot of Christians don't have. And now that she has come to the faith and is in right relationship with the Lord has allowed that past to be a tool for her, because that's a foundational experience, and it shapes her worldview, her biblical worldview, and it opens her paradigm on what's going on. And she's even had to wrestle with negative thoughts towards Christians that have the blinders on because they haven't had that experience. And why don't you understand all this supernatural type stuff, the influence of the darkness? But she grew up in it. So she has a different paradigm. So
yeah,
she's got to extend grace and patience to her brothers and sisters in Christ in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a tool in God's hand, and anyways.
Right.
But
Yeah. It's awesome when you have that and John Ramirez and these others, these SRA survivors that have this intel. As Tim Alberino says, if I ever got abducted, I would pray that I would be the one person God would allow to have remembrance of these events, because they talk about, I forget how he put it, the memories being blocked. So they only remember.
Tim Alberino says that. Yeah, that's what one of his prayers. That he could use that as a tool against the enemy.
Yep, of intel. Yeah. All right, just kind of run through a few more things. How do scholars and theologians explain away Goliath, David and Goliath, his size, and make a case for the Sethite non-giant tribes? I found an excellent article online. I found it free, thankfully. It's like an academic article, about 20 pages. And actually, Doug Van Dorn mentions this, and so does Ryan Pitterson in his book, that there's a discrepancy between, like, you take the King James and then some other versions. So some will say like 6 cubits for in a span for his height, and others will say 4. And so there'll be people that, well-intentioned, I'm sure, that are explaining it away and saying he wasn't a giant, he was like 6'10" or something, And so there's a very, very good explanation of why there's that discrepancy in there. So that would be really cool to get into. We talked a little bit about the breeding program, the hybrid breeding program, then and now. The seed work.
I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it again. That Tim Apparino, L.A. Mazzulli were discussing the Pentagon's report.
Okay.
This is our U.S. government, the Pentagon's report on this subject, and the Pentagon is talking about pregnancies.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So it leads to the question, which they don't answer in the report: who's impregnating them, and where did the babies go?
There you go. Exactly.
Because there's a testimony that L.A. Mazzulli has with at least one mother. She was impregnated 3 different times and got documentation from physicians. And within like the first or second trimester, but she wasn't that far along. She basically has another abduction, and now the baby's gone. Now I don't have a baby.
That's crazy.
It happened 3 times in her life.
We've talked a good deal about, Genesis 6 and the sons of God, and could an angel actually procreate? Think about this, guys. This is not news to you, but to the listeners, you have the Messiah coming by supernatural means, okay? Only had a human mother. You have these people, abductees, satanic ritual abuse, talking about being impregnated. Forget all about Genesis 6 and the Watchers mating with human women. We've got evidence today, and so, this is why all of this ties together, and it's so foundational to understand. Deep underground military bases. There's hopefully it's still on YouTube, but there's a 30-year-old grainy recording of a guy named I'm going to butcher it now. I can't think of it right now. Phil Schneider. Thank you, sir. All right, Phil Schneider, talking about, he was an engineer working down in these bases, and the creatures and different things that he saw. Pretty crazy. Nephilim qualities, like characteristic traits. Laura Sanger gets into that. The appeal of Israel going after other gods, because they were real, not just because they thought, look at this cool little block of wood I made. And then, kind of the suppression of the Genesis 6 angel view from the Catholic Church, from Augustine, Calvin, the Jewish leaders. So Michael Heiser talks about the 2 powers in heaven view that early Jews had. Well, they abandoned that after Jesus, because you couldn't have a God coming in the flesh. That because he wasn't the Messiah to them, right? So now we need to abandon the angel view of Genesis 6 because that's spirit being coming into flesh. So that was one of their motivations for getting rid of that. Extra biblical books, how they should be treated. Do they conflict with the Bible? What do they say? Why should they be given importance? Like Book of Enoch. Animal life corrupted by the Watchers. Dinosaurs, minotaurs, centaurs, satyrs, all these kind of chimera beings. It's kind of my opinion that maybe some of the violent dinosaurs might have been hybrids that the Watchers and giants messed with their DNA. I think about like T-Rex or Velociraptor, and I go, I just don't see God making that alongside mankind.
And they didn't make it on the ark.
And they didn't make it on the ark, yes. But here in Job, right, we have the description of like a brachiosaurus. You know, a tail like a cedar. Well, a cedar is like a 40 to 80 foot tree. You know, so, some have said you're talking about a hippo. Have you seen a hippo's tail? It looks like a pig's tail, a little squiggly thing. So it's not a hippo. So there were dinosaurs living with us, but I'm just wondering about some of the violent ones. Maybe those were hybrid beings that well, they talk about it today, right? That they say they're evolved from birds. Well, maybe it was a bird and lizard kind of chimerical creature that was created. Technology of the Watchers. What did they teach? How did it affect humanity? Some have said, are they released from their chains now? Because I think in Enoch it said how many generations they were going to be released. But then the Bible also says, reserved in chains until the judgment. So are those original 200 Watchers still there?
I've heard different opinions on that, and I would tend to agree with it that those are documented in Jude, are also documented in Revelation, and that when the judgments are coming upon the earth, when the seals are being opened by Christ, that's when they're going to be released.
Okay.
That's the way I understand it, and it's almost like they're going to be on a vendetta, and going after mankind, and God is going to use their anger for being in chains for so long, essentially, as part of the judgment upon mankind. That's kind of how I think of it.
That is some stored up wrath right there. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yes. SRA, DRD, Doug Riggs, his counseling, that would be something definitely to dig into and look at, because his website still has a ton of resources, right, Luke?
Yeah, I've got to email one of his individuals that's in his congregation that managed that website is still living and doing that. So I get email updates. He still finds old messages of Pastor Doug's, and he'll share them in the email, and he's managing that website still. So,
very good.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Just kind of shoot through a few more topics. Giants in history, the evidence, the textual evidence, megaliths, bones, sightings, the mounds, angelology, demonology. Mike Heiser's got some good books on that. Their origin, their characteristics. We've talked a good bit about, if there are fallen angels, are they free to roam besides Satan? Is Revelation a third of the stars a future event, or did it happen at the time of Messiah's birth, or some ancient event? Continuing to go through Blurry Creatures episodes, because there's a ton of good material there. And then you got L.A. Marzulli. He's got DVD series that are excellent. On the trail of the
and
Nephilim.
His YouTube channel is he's constantly using that throughout the week, and I think he does a YouTube day that where his broadcast does a Q&A.
Okay.
So you have questions, you can email him, and he'll get to them eventually.
Nice.
And so there, pick his brain type of thing. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, awesome.
Definitely a resource.
Yeah, and while I'm thinking of it, another good resource is Skywatch TV. That's Tom Horn, Josh Peck,
Derek Gilbert.
Derek Gilbert, that's the other one. Yep, excellent guys.
Yep. I actually just re-listened to the Blurry Creature episode where Josh Peck was
cool.
discussing CERN. It's one of the older, maybe a year old.
Okay.
But, interesting subject.
Yep. Then, of course, there's eschatology and Revelation, end time stuff. That's a big one. A lot of speculation. It's hard to understand, but let's see here. Just the damage to Christianity by not understanding Genesis 6 regarding the flood. Giving ammo to atheists and antagonists of Christianity by thinking God is this genocidal maniac, not understanding what, Joshua and Israel were up against. Tower of Babel, Nimrod, Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82, God's over the nations. I'm still kind of working my way through Annette Yoshiko Reed's book on the view of Enoch, how it was viewed from about the 2nd century BC up to the Middle Ages. Unseen Realm topics from Mike Heiser's book. I also want to read Reversing Herman. I think that'd be really good for us to go through. Coming Deception, the Bible talking about, strong delusion, coming deception in the end times. That might be kind of this alien disclosure that we started the show with, right? This idea that there's going to be a false Messiah coming. And remember, because the Revelation says signs and wonders. So it's not going to be like, hey, look at me. It's going to be some pretty amazing things are probably going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, and it's been extremely popular. And they're trying to use that as an explanation to explain all these megaliths in the past, and that type of stuff, similar to what Graham Hancock kind of talks about.
When you talk about Graham Hancock, I just became acquainted with him this morning.
Okay.
And the Netflix series that he is a part of, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to look for it. What's the name of the series?
I'd have to double check.
Is it Ancient Apocalypse or?
I believe it is. Yes.
Yes, that's what it is. Okay.
And then that is an excellent series. He's not looking at this from a biblical worldview. He's not a Christian. He's looking at it from a secular worldview. It's an excellent series. I'm thankful that Netflix put some money in and allowed him to do it. And then if you want to continue down, he's got books that you could deep dive into. Better yet than the books, in my opinion, because you can multitask with it. Spotify, Joe Rogan. You could do a Google search or a search on Spotify, Graham Hancock, and Carlson. Forget his first name. Randall Carlson.
Yeah.
Excellent interviews, long format interviews that Joe Rogan does with those two that gives even more information on those subjects.
And there's some good short clips
and
too
all
on
those
YouTube
tie
of those.
into what we've been discussing, but they're looking at it from a secular viewpoint.
Right.
And it very possibly the evidence that they're presenting could be what the Bible describes as the biblical flood.
Yeah, the place I get stuck on is when they're talking about this 12,000, 13,000 year thing, and somehow we have to account for that if we're talking about when the flood happened in terms of the human timeline. And if we're going just biblically and there isn't like some multiple millennium gap somewhere, that's where I kind of get hung up and I go, yeah, but the flood would have happened like 5,000 years ago, not 12,000 years ago. So I'm not sure on that.
Yeah.
But it did happen. The evidence is there. Yeah, well, there's too many there's too many more things here I have written down to list. Too many good resources and topics, but I think we've done a good job just kind of laying out the groundwork of kind of what we want our discussions to be about, and just feeling free to disagree and bring up stuff and ask questions. And I think hopefully we're all feeling like more motivation to just do our own research and talk about it beyond just kind of these things being fascinating and interesting, because they're important. And if we can help, even a couple people to understand their Bible better and the world that they're in and what's to come better, then it's having a positive effect. So it's, I've thought of it, said it several times, that like it's, Luke, you and I kind of have been on this track as far as the Nephilim and different things for a while now. Once you introduced me to that with Randy DeMaine a decade or so ago. So it's like, okay, cool. Wow, that's interesting, Okay, now I know what I believe about that. And that's fine and dandy, but to actually do something with it, talk about it, expand on it, invite other people to talk about it. Like, I think that's the importance. So.
No, that sounds good. I think that's an exhaustive list, and if we continue to, as me and you have discussed, and why we started recording this and having these discussions, we want to basically almost do like a book club, whether it's reading a book, discussing it, looking at it from different points of view, a podcast, Netflix documentary, whatever it happens to be, and ask questions, and so it's good.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Until next time. Have a good week.
See you later.
See you, Don. You got more to say?
Days of Noah podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate that you spent some time with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, please give us a positive review, give a like, share it with your family and friends. And as always, God bless, and see you next week.
You got more to say?